We're talking about active voices and passive voices. And here we are, of course, referring to the verb. The verb tells you the tense of when that action is happening. And the verb also has an aspect called the mood, or actually voice in this case. Voice can be either active or passive, and it simply tells you whether the subject of your sentence is doing the action or receiving the action. So an active voice is the form of the verb that tells you that the subject is doing the action. As in the sentence, John wrote the report. You know who's doing the writing. John is doing the writing. The report isn't doing the writing. Report is being written. So that's what the passive is. In a passive sentence, the subject of the sentence, grammatical subject, is receiving the action. So what you have is you begin with the report as the subject of the sentence. It's the same sentence kind of reversed in order. And then you would say the report was written by John. Okay? So the meaning is exactly the same. John wrote the report, or the report was written by John. One is called active and one is called passive. And for the writer, what you want to remember is that if they are identical, if they say the same thing and you don't have any good reason to use the passive, then you should prefer the active over the passive. So here it says, use active whenever possible. So in a sentence like this, the proposed legislation was filibustered by the Democrats. Okay. We use the passive verb here, was filibustered, and we started with the legislation as the subject. In this case, there's not much reason to justify using a passive voice, because you can say the Democrats filibustered the new legislation. And this is considered more direct, more forceful, and it's shorter, it's more condensed. You're not wasting words and space by using the active verb. And so this is the preferred version, okay, when possible. Now, there are cases where the passive voice is the more appropriate voice to use. And one case is to use the passive when the doer is unknown or unimportant. Okay, we don't know who's doing this action. As in this sentence, my car was stolen last night. Who stole it? Well, it must have been a thief, but he's not somebody I know. Okay, if it was my cousin, I would say my cousin stole my car, but I don't know who it is. So I don't want to say a thief stole my car, which is very obvious, or somebody stole my car, which is obvious. It couldn't have been a dog, right? So in cases like that where the subject is unknown or it's unimportant, we would start with the sentence with the car, and the message of what I want to convey through the sentence is that it was stolen, not so much about who did it. Okay, in a different sentence, once I find out it was my cousin, then I would want to emphasize, oh, my cousin stole my truck, my car yesterday, and I would start with my cousin as the beginning of the sentence, making it the subject. But in this case, what's more important is the car being stolen, so this is why I start with the car. Next sentence says, this building will be demolished next month. Who's doing it? Well, some construction workers, demolition workers from the city, or some private contractors, or whoever. I don't know them. I don't need to know them. It doesn't matter. That's not important. What's important is that the building will be demolished. Okay? So that's the passive voice when the passive voice is justified. Now, I told you that active voice is preferred when possible. There are some school teachers, English teachers, that will kind of go overboard and they will say, never use the passive verb. Okay? Always say everything 100% in active, never passive. And that's kind of a wrong advice, and it's not possible to do it that way. I suppose it's possible, but it will make your writing very awkward because there are places where passive voice has to be used. So the general rule that you should follow is that the active voice is generally preferred over the passive voice. Okay, it's not an absolute must. And the typically accepted rule that I've seen in a lot of places is that your writing should be about 70% active and 30% passive. That's in general terms. If you don't consider, whether you're using the passive voice where necessary or not. But after you're done writing your essay, and when you look back and you see that you have some passive here and there, and it seems like 30% or less, then you're on a good track. If you find that more than half of your sentences are written in the passive, you should go back and look more closely. But if you follow the actual rule of using passive only when necessary, you wouldn't have to even worry about that.